It was 60 years ago today. 168 people lost their lives in the Hartford Circus Fire. It remains the worst disaster in the city's history and an indelible memory for the survivors. Today, ground was broken on a memorial that will pay tribute to those who lost their lives. NBC 30's John Sablone live in Hartford with our story. John.
Thanks, Jerry. Folks, I'm standing in a wonderfully vast field behind the Fred Wish Elementary School here on Barber Street. It was in this very field that year after year after year, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus would pitch their huge tent to put on the greatest show on earth. And this is where that fire occurred. Now, as we indicated, 168 lives were lost, and to show you how much feeling there was expressed here today during that ceremony, these flowers, this wasn't planned, these flowers were placed here impromptu just to show some respect for people who were lost that day. This was a moment, I can tell you folks, that was 60 years in the making. This is the artist's rendering of what the memorial will look like. The groundbreaking ceremony magnetically drew people from near and far, some even from California. They'd come back to the site of the Great Circus Fire, a conflagration that in 6 minutes consumed a mammoth canvas tent. 168 people, most of them children, were either burned or trampled to death. Those who came back 60 years later came with their individual memories.
Fire zoomed up the top of the tent, and someone said, "Fire, fire,
How'd you
fire."
get out, Carol?
It was a man. We jumped down from the preacher, and he opened up the back of the tent to let us out.
People ran, panicked. Families were separated.
And I walked out alone with some woman behind me, holding my shoulder and saying, "Keep walking, don't fall, you'll get trampled." We made it out. I didn't know where my family was. They didn't know where I was. And when I got outside, this woman just disappeared. I turned around, and I'm wondering if it was my guardian angel.
The ceremonial turning of the earth was followed by children releasing 168 balloons, each containing a victim's name. I will add that in addition to the 168 people who perished here on July 6, 1944, there were hundreds others who escaped, but escaped with injuries, and some of them were here today. We're going to share stories with some of those people at 6 o'clock. I can tell you that work on this memorial is going to get started pretty soon because it's supposed to be ready by October. Reporting live in Hartford, John Sablone, NBC 30, Connecticut News.
168 lives were lost on this day in 1944, most of them children. And now plans for a memorial have been unveiled. Channel 3 Eyewitness News reporter Susan Raff is live with our mobile newsroom at the site. Now, Susan, you say you found some who are saying this memorial is long overdue.
Al, that's right. It's been 60 years, 6 decades, but finally a memorial is going to be built here on the site of the tragic circus fire. And even though it's been such a long time, people say their memories of that day are still very fresh. In fact, it was difficult for some people to come here today.
It was a terrible day. It was a terrible day.
Frank DiMartino has come a couple of times to the site where his mother and aunt were killed in the circus fire. His sister Rose has not.
Even standing here feels strange, it really does. Butterflies.
Rose was 11, Frank 7, when they got separated from their mother in a rush of panic. Today, for the first time, they are meeting other survivors.
No.
Bob O'Connell lost 3 members of his family, including his 4-year-old sister.
The last words my mother said were to my grandfather. She said, "We'll meet you outside." And of course, they never did.
The Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus Fire of July 6, 1944.
And now, 60 years later, a memorial for 68 adults and 100 children killed in one of the worst fires in history. The circus tent was covered in paraffin wax and gasoline, making it dangerously flammable. Standards today are a lot tougher. Survivors, however, say there's an even bigger lesson.
To cherish your loved ones while they're here.
Rhoda Steinberg remembers looking back at her grandfather. That was the last time she saw him. There is now an elementary school near the site. Today, children release balloons, each marked with a name of someone who died.
That was a very nice association for my grandfather and me and little children. That was nice.
At the time of this terrible fire, Hartford really had no fire codes, and unfortunately, it took 168 people to die to change that. Now we are told that in October, the memorial will finally be built for the 168 people who lost their lives right here at this site. We're live in Hartford. Susan Raff, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
Brad. The worst disaster in Hartford's history is a step closer tonight to a permanent memorial. 60 years ago today, on a hot summer afternoon in the city's North End, 168 people died in a fire inside a circus tent. Today, ground was broken on a memorial to those victims. NBC 30's John Sablon is in Hartford tonight with the emotional story. John?
Thanks very much, Joe. Folks, I'm in the field behind the Wish Elementary School where indeed that memorial is going to be located. This indeed is where the fire took place 60 years ago. One of the victims who died in that fire was an unidentified little girl who came to be known as Little Miss 1565. She touched the hearts of firefighters and police and other emergency workers because, if memory serves me correctly, the flames, smoke, nothing touched her face, and it was said to be angelic in nature. Well, 167 other people died in that fire too, each one of them with a story. Survivors came back here today after 60 years, and the survivors had stories too. The ceremony brought many survivors of the fire. They sat or stood beneath a blazing sun which similarly hung over this site 60 years ago when the unthinkable happened. 168 people died on July 6, 1944, when flames devoured the Ringling Brothers circus tent. A coating of paraffin and gasoline meant to protect circus goers from rain served as fuel for the killer blaze. Billy Epps was one of 3 chosen for the groundbreaking. He lost several family members in the circus fire.
My mother was 8.5 months pregnant at the time. She lost a baby. My cousin Mario was trampled to death. And her mother, my aunt, she was also trampled to death.
I do remember the fire was just over my left shoulder.
Elisa Don and her family were sitting where the voracious fire began. They barely escaped, but not unscathed.
My brother jumped out first. He was 14, and then the 2 6-year-olds and an 8-year-old, we kind of got pushed out, and then my mother followed. She was the last one to come down, and she fractured her ankle and had some 3rd-degree burns.
Such clear and painful memories lent some sweetness to this event.
But at least my cousin and the other 167 people have not been forgotten.
The memorialization has begun even before the memorial itself is begun to be built. It's expected to be finished in October. Reporting live in Hartford, John Sablon, NBC 30.
Came from all over Connecticut and from as far away as California, coming to the site of the Hartford Circus Fire. More than 200 survivors, their families and friends were in Hartford to mark today's 60th anniversary of that tragic blaze that killed 168 people, most of them children.
Oh, the screaming, the smell of burning flesh, and you just kept walking. You didn't know what it was at the time. But.
Now, that groundbreaking you saw there was for a memorial that is to be built at the site of the fire, which is off Barber Street. $100,000 has already been raised in private donations.